I'd like to welcome everyone as you're coming into this meeting. This is the Stafford Hamlet Community Meeting and the Stafford CPO meeting. My name is Katie Wilson. I am the Clackamas County Community Liaison for the Hamlet and the CPO. Love to welcome you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. This evening, if you'd like to speak and you're a member of the audience, the easiest way to do that is to familiarize yourself with the raise your hand feature. It's usually in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Sometimes it's in the upper portion of your screen if you're using some Apple devices. If you're unable to raise your hand, you also can enter questions or comments into chat, and I'm happy to share those with the panelists as they present this evening. Again, welcome to the Stafford Hamlet and CPO meeting. We are very glad you could join us.
Thanks, Katie. We have a good, I think, a good batch of information to share with you tonight, both from with Andrew Spear from Portland General Electric, Rick Cook and Mark Brown from Lake Oswego Heritage Council, and then the CPO portion, as always, has plenty of activity. We're also joined tonight by both a current political influencer, and that would be County Commissioner Mark Shull. And also we have with us past Lake Oswego City Councilor Jeff Goodman. Thanks to both of you for your willingness to stay connected with us and be involved, and certainly we welcome any input that you have as we go through the meeting tonight. So at this point then, as per our most recent meetings, I'm going to turn it over to Rick Cook, who will take us down the trail of the heritage trail of the Stafford Hamlet. Rick, take it away.
Thanks, Bill. Katie, if you want to flip those on, I'd like to welcome everybody for our little quick down the trail, as Bill said. So once again, we're sponsored by Eugene Wine Cellars. They're Eugene-based, but Stafford roots, and Bruce Beal, the owner, now lives up off of Mountain Road up there. And of course, our brilliant person is the professor of Providence, Mark Brown from the Oswego Heritage Council, is here again to walk us through that stuff. So we got two questions for you tonight for the drawing of the bottle of wine. So Katie, if you want to scroll that up to the first question or poll. So the first one is the monthly quiz. Okay, so we're going to do a poll. So as the poll goes through, it's kind of hard to squeeze that all in here, but I'll just read real quick. So Chautauqua was one of the following. It was the First People's spiritual and cultural celebration, or was it a religious gathering for self-improvement and religious instruction, or was it the name of the first sternwheeler on the Tualatin River from Hillsborough to Sucker Lake, which is now Oswego Lake, or Lake Oswego, I should say. And then, or was it a type of mushroom found in the region? So Katie, do they have to answer that now, or do you want to read both questions and have them answer both?
I think for this poll to work the way that Garrett set it up, they have to answer both questions.
Okay, so and then the second one, Royal Ann cherries. They're a semi-dwarf brought to Willamette Valley by Henderson Llewellyn in 1847 from Iowa. Was it A.R. Shipley in 1854 from Ohio? Was it Satoru Hinatsu in 1864 from Japan? Or there's one other one at the bottom that I can't read. Oh, there. Napoleon, and I'll screw up his name. So all you French people, I'll ask for your forgiveness. Bigodeau from 1849 from Vancouver, BC. So once again, if you just mark your answer to the first question, those four and then plug in the second one, we'll move on. And Katie will let us know when. So you've got a question about cherries and about the Chautauqua. And then as we go through, actually tonight, Mark's going to answer those questions as we go through the presentation. And then at the very end, we'll come back and see who the lucky winner is of a bottle of wine from Eugene Wine Cellars. So Katie, can you show
It looks,
go ahead.
yeah, it looks like we have 60% saying the first people's spiritual and cultural celebration.
Okay.
And we have a tie for the Royal Anne cherries between Satoru Hinatsu from Japan and Napoleon B from Vancouver, BC.
Okay, well, and as we go through, we will answer those questions. So if you could go back to that, oh, well, thank you. There you can kind of see the answer, which I will tell you now, those aren't the correct answers. So we fooled you. Tough questions this week. Anyway, so if you want to go back and we'll turn it over to our professor of provenance, Mark Brown, who is with the Oswego Heritage Council and has done the just extensive work about the Azalea area and the Hamlet. So with that, Dr. Brown is in the house.
Well, all right. Good to see you all again tonight. I think when Rick burdened me with the incredible amount of work to discover your history, I was sort of blown away at first. I think when you approach a history problem or a history investigation, you need a certain analysis perspective, and that perspective is either first, second, or third person. A first person perspective would be the diaries written actually in situ by the people that are living the history right then and there. That is relatively rare, and it's even more rare to have multiple years of a single family as well. It's really a precious thing that gives a really broad perspective. Second person view is almost non-existent. I don't see that very often. And third person is sort of the he, she, or it or they perspective. And that's what you get out of newspapers. And a secondary source would be the photographs, which you see there on your screen. Most people gravitate to that because they're rather ubiquitous, and they sort of give you this two-dimensional shot of the then, but this, and unless you do a lot of forensic analysis, there's not a lot of substance sometimes that can come out of it. So there are horizontal lines of assessment and there are vertical lines of assessment. And in Rick's collection, in your community, we have the opportunity to have vertical lines of assessment. And tonight, Rick put together one of those vertical lines of today through all of the years, 06 to 13, 25, and 36. So that's kind of a precious thing to have. There's a few diaries in our community, the Davidson diaries with Lucian, the Cora Wilmot diaries in the 1940s, and a few others as well, the Shipley diaries as well. Give you a little bit of that, but nothing is as comprehensive or as well written as these diaries are.
So Mark, just real quick. So what we did, we were talking about what we could do, and I thought, you know what, let's look at July 13th. So today you're going to look at, see, and as we go through the slides for each year, what happened that day, and some real strong themes will come out to that.
Yeah.
So Katie, if you want to slide to the next one and we'll get going here.
And we'll go through these pretty quickly. And there's 06 and 07. And again, you can see your neighborhood grew a lot of cabbage. And in these particular diary entries, one of the most consistent things in all of the diaries, all 7 of the family diaries that I have in the Heritage House, one of the things that is constant is the weather is mentioned. And do you know why the weather was mentioned every single time, regardless of what was going on? The answer is because you lived and died by the weather. So I actually did a little bit of a weather analysis today in 1898 in Springbrook, and I actually found a site where every community every day in 1898 in the Willamette Valley listed the high and the low temperatures, a remarkable source. So sometimes when I was doing Rick's analysis, I would go to a source like that. And when, say his grandmother would say that it was really hot this day, I could actually tell you it was 91 degrees on the day. So there are sources like that that sort of add to the substance of the analysis of what you see. In 07, it says that they shocked hay. Being a city boy, I didn't know a whole lot about farming. So I purchased a book in the 1880s, sort of the Bible of farming out of England. And sure enough, verbatim, a lot of the information in that 1880 book taught me about how the fields were plowed and how the hay was shocked, how the pigs were slaughtered, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'll give you that source later. But anyway, next slide.
And I believe that's Jerry Fiala, if I'm not saying, one of the Fiala boys.
Yes,
fathers.
out in the field.
Rich will correct us, I'm sure.
Yeah. Did Rich ever get his tractor fixed?
Yes.
Okay, good. Anyway, in 08, again, here are the cherries. I finally found out Hugh and the cooks would actually take their produce to Portland. I found 12 of the fruit canneries, finally. It took me 2 years to find a source on, they were all on Front Street. To where actually, I don't know which particular one they actually went to. They don't mention it in the diaries, but there were, at this particular time, there were 12 canneries in Portland, mostly on Front Street.
And the amazing part about this is you know, you're going to see some spellings that are different, but that's how it was written in the diary. So we just transposed it as they were here. And so once again, here's your first answer that the Royal Anns were brought to Henderson Lewing in 1850 from Iowa. And his brother actually helped set those out. So I've seen his name, Henderson or Hedson, so I just put that in there. And so that's the picture of the Royal Ann cherries.
Yeah. In the diaries in Rick's collection, we spent a lot of time plotting on a graph every single year and what was planted and when it was planted and when it was harvested and when it was taken to Portland. They were planting all of the time and they were harvesting all of the time. One of the interesting things about the cabbage thing is that they actually harvested cabbage in December. There was a type of cabbage developed actually in your area that would grow in very, very cold weather. Couldn't handle too much freezing for too long, but if they got out quick enough, December 15th, and cut their cabbage, they could actually have access to Portland to drop the cabbage off. Didn't always buy cabbage though. Sometimes they would load up their wagon with 1,200 pounds of cabbage and take it up to Portland and nobody would buy it. So I find that interesting. Next slide. Okay, here's Art Stevens plowing. One of the interesting things, almost everybody in your community through that 30-year period, if you will, was mentioned at least once, and it was really tough finding out who they were. But you know, it took a long time to do that, but we finally did it. If you're ever interested in looking at the day-to-day activity of your community, Rick has that collection, and we can arrange for you to actually sit down and read through these diaries. It's I find it fascinating.
And that's Stevens Meadow in the background there, Cook Butte before Street of Dreams and the current property. And that's the old horse-drawn mower that Art Stevens is pulling with the two horses.
Okay, next. My world, dentistry. One of the constant problems, okay, again, outside of the weather being mentioned every day, every time someone got sick, it was mentioned. And sometimes you could follow the sickness to death, actually. Several children would get cholera. The Pollard kid, Tony Pollard, got typhoid and died after about 3 weeks. The Wittens would get ill and they would die as well. Liddy, for example, Rick's great aunt, actually was ill for a long time and eventually died in 1912. And then you can see sort of the interaction of the community and taking care of sick people. But the serious illnesses were noted. But one of the constant pains in the rear for these people were their dental maladies. I mean, Rick's grandmother and Hugh Baker and the Cooks were always going up to either Oregon City, but generally up to Portland to have teeth extracted. In the Wilmot Diaries over in Springbrook, there's actually a list of what teeth were taken out with Clara and Cora and Mary Lucretia Carmen. So they kept a track of all of these things. And my fee schedule when I was a dentist was a little bit higher than what you see now. But I actually contacted an old friend in my old dental school that taught about 50 years ago, and asked them about the current state of dentistry at the turn of the century. Didn't learn too much. I knew most of it already, but it was really fairly sophisticated. So anyway.
Well, and the fact that dentures would cost you $8, and then $8 in those days was fairly expensive, I would think.
Oh, I don't know what it would be. It would probably be, maybe, I don't know, probably $500 or $600 now. Yeah. Which is still actually low. I used to charge more than that, but gold fillings were $1, and they're a whole lot more now than that. So,
this was an ad in the paper that Mark put in the book, and those were pictures I added. So that wasn't the happenings of Grandma making Junior's teeth in the back room.
This is a sort of a third-person view of the newspaper reporting that actually gives a great deal of substance and lets you see what our people had to deal with. Now, Hugh was, I don't know, he was working most every single day, most of his life. In that whole 50-year period of the diaries that I read, I only saw him take 3 days off of vacation. He went up to Mount Hood and picked loganberries. But other than that, he was working all the time. And when he got $1, it was a very precious thing. And some years, especially, there's a sadness in, I think, the 06 and 07 years where they didn't have enough money for Christmas presents, and that really weighed on him psychologically. So anyway, if you read this sort of stuff, you can sort of fill in the gaps on how he had to come up with, I don't know, $8 for his son to have glasses in Oregon City. So, okay, next slide.
Yeah, we need to kind of scoot through these to get up on track a little bit. That's my fault. Sorry about that.
That's all right. What you see there, Rick, that's of interest?
Well, one thing is I almost called Rich Fiala and say, okay, what is Johnson grass? I'm going, did they go down the Johnsons to actually dig it? Or bring it back here stuff? And so I looked it up, and that's actually the right-hand picture over there is a picture of Johnson grass.
It was an invasive species that Hugh battled. He had to cross Charles Road on the south side, and he spent days and days and days with his son Wynn to cut that out so he could be able to break the land up and begin to plow it. But Johnson grass was this insidious thing that just drove people crazy. Took a lot of time to get rid of that. It was nasty stuff too.
Well, and the other piece to this that I wanted to show was the fact that, they talked about shock of hay, and I'm going like, what the heck are they talking about? you know, and just to be sure, I kind of had an idea, but basically, and then if you just read that middle section where it talks about it was to keep the grain heads off the ground. So that's why they stacked it like that, because it wasn't like hay where they were going to bale it. So
Yeah, it had to be dry, otherwise mold and
you know,
other things would get in there and destroy the wheat.
and you probably go to the next slide, Katie. Just very quickly, Mark, I'm going to jump in on this one. This is a paper that was July 13th from 1960, and all you have to do is go to the website there, the Oregon News at University of Oregon. If you just type in old newspapers at University of Oregon, you can get all of the old papers that they have actually downloaded online. And this one, you have to be careful, because if you, at one point I typed in JP Cook. Well, they gave me every J, every P,
Yes.
and every Cook.
Yeah.
So then went back and just did the Hazelia.
Yeah.
So you can kind of come back and read this stuff of, you know, just how social they were, and I mean, all the names of Borlands, and I mean, you just read that thing real quick. So that's kind of, we threw that one in there.
Yeah, precious asset. If you're really interested in how the neighborhood lived, that's your resource.
And not only that, but they talked about 12, I mean, just small community like Hazelia. They talked, you know, all around the whole area, with just like their little neighborhood gossip piece was thrown in there occasionally also. And then this is the answer to the Chautauqua question is at the bottom down there, which I read it and I said, Mark, what the heck are they talking about here? So you want to enlighten them on that, Mark?
Well, Chautauqua was remarkable. In your community, there was a Chautauqua meeting at least 4 times a year in the schoolhouse on Rick's property. And intellectually, these people were really quite astute. In fact, I did a little bit of analysis on the literacy rate of your community versus at the turn of the century versus the literacy of our students now. Guess which community was more literate and more well-rounded educationally? Hazelia in 1890 produced higher levels of educated children than we do now. Okay, now there's probably all kinds of reasons for that, but they were intellectually astute. There was a literary debating society as well as Chautauqua that filled in sort of the other week as well. And they had, the kids would study and debate, and they would be assigned that, you know, typical debating rules and that sort of thing. Chautauqua was one of the major forces of getting women's suffrage going as well. It was the big vehicle for women's suffrage.
And at one point in time over in Gladstone, they had 6,000 people show up on a Sunday for one of those.
Yeah, it's a countrywide thing. And actually the Oswego Heritage House is part of a daughter Chautauqua now. We have 5 Chautauqua meetings at the Heritage House every year. So I've given, I don't know, probably 4 different talks as well in Chautauqua. So it's a really cool organization. Okay, 25. I guess, again, more neighborhood news.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing that on this one, it was just that, you know, as much hard work as they done, you could kind of see the cycle every year in July. They were doing the cabbage, they were doing the harvest, they were doing the hay and all that. But they also had, you know, the other things in life. And that's one thing on the thing where the newspaper was there. They talked about neighbors suing each other, and that they had to go to court on that. And there are times where people, Wonker had to go do jury duty. So not only were they, you know, farmers and stuff, but they were involved in the community and doing those things also.
Yeah, they were mandated also by the mill tax in Oregon City to take care of the roads, and pretty much every road in front of their properties they had to take care of. So all the way down to the Shipley Bridge, they spent time fixing that as well. So they had to do that.
Great. So once again, really like to thank Eugene Wine-Cellars for providing the drawing rewards there. And Mark has done just such a great job. And if at any time you find old pictures or need information or have information that you'd like to get, Mark, you can contact him through the Oswego Heritage Council. He is just bends over backwards. I mean, he's lived here for what, maybe 6 years now. He probably knows more about Hazelia in the area than probably 99% of the population that lives out here. So appreciate that. And our winner tonight that we pulled up was Sally Vischer. So Sally, send me an email at rickjcook@frontier.com and I will get you we'll connect on getting you your bottle of wine. And thanks again for everybody for listening to the shared
you all.
history of Visalia. Thank you, Professor of Provenance.
Thanks, guys. We may be behind what they were doing in the early teens as far as awareness and intelligence and education, but by golly, we're trying to catch up. Okay, we're gonna move now to our featured speaker, Andrew Spear from Portland General Electric. Andrew, thanks so much for coming and sharing and be prepared to be enlightened with current events as opposed to the history. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Bill. I feel a little pressure now with the featured speaker title, so thank you. So I was able to connect with Rick and got some context for what you all were looking for, and my understanding is just wanting to understand a little bit about the storm, the recovery efforts, and what PG does to kind of restore power in those type of situations, well, in all situations, but especially extreme ones. So I've prepared just a few slides for you all to just digest and for me to walk through that I think might add a little context, and then hopefully might bring up some questions for you all that we can do a Q&A on. Just for some context, this is just a screenshot or a map of our service territory, PG's service territory, concentrated in Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and then, Marion County and Washington County. Yamhill and Polk are a little bit smaller for us. Just wanted to give that in terms of scoping that we have for when there is like a widespread outage similar to what we experienced during the storm. And this here, and I live, for a little bit of context, I live in Park Rose in Multnomah County, right? And so in Portland, so I didn't see the same level of ice at my home that you all saw. And so I didn't actually see this type of damage around me, but I'm sure you all saw this more clearly. This is out in Wilsonville, not far from you all, right? And kind of the damage that, to the extent of damage that we faced. As we were going through the storm process, we would get folks back online, back re-energized, and then, the next day would be ice, say, right? And then that would take out those same customers that we had re-energized the day before or 2 days before. And then here's just a few stats, just to give you some context again around what was faced during that specific storm and kind of what we had to work through. I'll just call out a few of the highlights here. In terms of the 400 plus crews that we had, over 240 of those crews came from out of state. So I think as far as Montana, Idaho, and I believe Nevada. So when a storm occurs for any utility, there's a process that a call goes out to all the utilities in the region for line crews to come down, to come from wherever is available to support whichever utility is facing a disaster situation. And the other thing of note just here that I think is fascinating is the bottom bullet, the 983 poles. That's, I believe there was something over 50 to 60 truckloads of poles, which is just phenomenal when you think about how many poles that really is. And then just one other note, the 12,000 wire downs, that's a really big statistic, obviously. And during those situations like we had in February, what's required is for personnel who aren't necessarily direct field folks that are line personnel, they'll actually go out and do the wire down checks and then report back and get it into the queue. So, you know, a lot of calls come in, of course, but we still have to do an assessment on our end. So, you know, think about the number that's there of the 12,000 plus, and then kind of what's required for us to do our validation prior to crews being issued out to make the repair. And I just wanted to put this in here. You know, as we think about the service we provide as an electric utility, the notion of resilience has kind of come into our vernacular more and more over the last, say, 10 to 15 years. Resilience during a storm event, resilience and reliability during a, you know, as renewables come onto our system. So just a little bit of context for you all and how we think about and adopt our operations and our generation over time. And then I'm kind of transitioning the presentation to what we do preemptively in advance of a storm to prevent outages. And a lot of that work, as you can imagine, revolves around vegetation management. And so we have a lot of different, on the far hand, right hand side, there's a, you know, it makes mention of technology that we use. It's referenced and called LiDAR, and it's basically a mapping system that will show density around our lines. And then that pings and identifies for us where we need to go out and do tree trimming around either, you know, more rural locations. So thinking outside of city centers, you know, so maybe our transmission lines or our larger distribution lines that are crossing through denser forest areas. And then, you know, you all see the Asplin trucks out, I'm sure, the orange trucks, that's who we contract with for a lot of our tree trimming work. And we have our own crews as well. But, you know, that in terms of the folks out in the field, that's what you have there. And then advanced wildfire risk reduction, you know, a lot of this is coming back to how do we prevent any of our infrastructure from causing a spark and starting a fire. And so that's just an ongoing process engagement. And we're actually working with the Oregon Public Utilities Commission to identify, you know, all of our processes during an emergency, in advance of an emergency, like a wildfire. Then this slide's just to highlight for you a little bit of the categories of emergency preparedness that we're working on. And, you know, I'll just call out that a lot of this is organic, right? And goes back to meetings like this and creating awareness and education on, you know, how folks can both proactively prepare and then how PGE can have awareness about specific customer needs or areas that have unique characteristics that we need to be aware of and mindful of. I, for example, I should have gave a little more intro to myself in the beginning, but I'm actually the local government affairs manager for Multnomah County, and I'm just covering some work in Clackamas County while we're working on a new hire that will cover and represent PGE in Clackamas County. And I did a meeting with the Oxbow Park area community. It's about 60 homes. You know, and as you can imagine, they're in a dense forest area. And so, you know, they have a lot of outages because of that. And so they chewed on my ear for an hour and a half about their experiences. So, but it's good, it's helpful. It gets back to our operations and we're able to make some system changes on our end over time. And then that was the extent of my slides in terms of prepared items. And then I was going to open up to questions either from the board or via the chat. I don't know, however works best for any audience questions. You know, I'm interested in just what folks have interest in, and then where I can help either answer or take back and get more information on as we go forward, and I can circle back with you all. And I will say that Rick did ask, like, in general, what does PGE do in terms of an outage? And I'll just maybe take a minute and just answer that question for you all. So when there's an outage, it can hit our system and we can see it from many different angles. So if it's a large outage and it's cascading across a lot of customers, we'll usually have insight into that from either a substation level or an individual switch out in the field. But if it's a smaller outage, we may only know about it from the customer level calling in. So it can vary, but in general, the response would be awareness of the outage by us and our operations, and then crews being, or someone in the field being dispatched. It's called an eagle. It's someone who works in that role as an eagle will go out, assess the situation. They're usually like a former line person. Assess the situation. They'll power down, de-energize a line if it's on the ground, for instance, and then they'll call out a crew and give the specific work order that's needed for that job, for the repair. That's in general what it looks like. It can be as simple as a switch being tripped, similar to thinking about your breakers at home, but it's just it's either in a substation or up on a pole. So it requires a crew. So that's just a little flavor, but then it can be as complex as a transformer needing to be replaced in front of your home. So, and I did see a hand go up before I started answering that question.
Bill has his hand up first.
There we go. Thanks, by the way, for doing this, Andrew. How often, or I guess on what kind of a basis do you convert from overhead to underground? I mean, obviously, the new developments are all underground, and from probably the 80s on. But it seems like it's a pretty big deal to change the major feed lines that come into underground. But do you do that, or do you have that on your to-do list?
Yeah, so undergrounding is as you can imagine, it's complex and expensive because you're taking infrastructure and just relocating, and that has a lot of different unintended consequences that I'll get to in a second. But a lot of that work is initiated and engaged with by the cities and the counties. And so, if I'm thinking of, I'm actually dealing with Troutdale right now about some work that they'd like to do to get lines underground. But PGE as the utility doesn't pay for that work to go underground. It's at the cost of the customer. And so in this case, it's some right of way that the city would own that they'd like to have undergrounded. And so they're coming to us saying, we have the dollars now set aside. We'd like to underground these lines. And so that's the kind of runway of us initiating undergrounding, or it's an ordinance by the city requiring undergrounding. So therefore the new customer coming into the area would need to pay for those wires to go underground, is also another modality that occurs. But, as we go into different weather situations, right, if we look at the winter storm, yes, undergrounding would have served well. But I will say there was an example that came up actually at the governor's mansion where power was lost there due to the fact, and it was all undergrounded wires going to the home, but because trees fell, it uprooted wires. And so you have this dynamic of, yes, undergrounding does help with resiliency in terms of, right, wires not going down from tree limbs, but you have the reverse from the root system. So Then also another just key thing to keep in mind is during a heat event like we experienced a couple weeks ago, underground facilities aren't able to cool in the same way overhead facilities are. And so we can have outages where we wouldn't normally expect them because they're underground and they can't cool fast enough. So I don't know if that gets exactly at your question, Bill, but that's kind of the flavor of what we experience with undergrounding.
The next question is from Mitch.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Thanks for coming. I just had a question on how the priority works for when you have a widespread outage like we did have. How do you know? I mean, are you taking the guys with, if something happens and 5 people go out with power, another spot's 27, another spot's like 3, which I think is like our case, which it took us 9 days to get back. How does the priority get set for where the people work, what they fix first and bring up?
Yeah, so good question. Thanks, Mitch. So there's a couple different things that we keep in mind. First and foremost, through the Oregon Public Utility Commission has identified for all the utilities that serve in Oregon, the different echelons of customers and priorities and you know, say like critical facilities, right? Like a hospital, that type of thing. But then they've also identified for us what falls into like a critical customer, like we all as residential customers. And so we have some classifications, namely in the medical certificate realm. So that's one thing we track and keep aware of. But then operationally, what we're doing, so triaging in that case of the storm, the February storm, what we were doing, and I was just actually having a call with our director for engineering operations, and what he was reinforcing to me that we were doing during the storms were, you know, say you're in an area where you've got 60,000 customers off or out of power, and there's 5 feeder lines coming in to serve those 60,000 customers. We're going to work on restoring power to those feeder lines first, and then that will get the substations up that feed into those to serve those customers. And then from there, we'll go downstream. But what they were doing was trying to get the largest number of customers back online. So if out of a substation, there were 10,000 customers that they could do by one fix, but then out of that same substation, there was like 50 customers, they were kind of moving on to the next one with the larger amount of customers. So that's why you may have seen trucks hopping around more so than usual, because they were looking for the largest kind of bang for the buck that they could get in terms of customers being recovered all at once.
Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah.
The next question is from Patty, and then we have a question in chat.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I know in my neighborhood, and I'm sure in many neighborhoods, the frustration was not being able to get information about when we might expect to have power restored. So is there, you know, any advice as to how we could get that information?
Yeah.
I mean, we all recognize that it was a terrible event and we knew that it was going to take some time, but you know, even just to be able to have them say, okay, well, it's probably like 4 days for you guys or something. Just to have a little, something so we could know, oh, okay, well, we're on their radar. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, totally reasonable question. And yeah, I can relate to you. I think what the difficulty is we've gone right to right, as a society, we've gone to a situation where we kind of push everyone to try to get to our website and for information. And right, when power is out, we don't necessarily have access to internet in the same way. And so, you know, one thing I know that some communities were doing right was they were trying to get cell phone coverage if they didn't have it where they lived and get onto the website. So I know that was one way. Outside of that, there is the phone option if your phone is still up and going to call in, but I'm sure what you experienced was it just gave you like the number of outages in your area or on your street. The other thing I'll mention that's difficult for us is kind of back to that question that Mitch gave around how do you restore power? What do you consider as you're doing that? That triage process that I described, that's what we're going through operationally. And so if you were one of those, in my example, if you were one of those 50 customers that were out, we wouldn't necessarily know if we could get you back on in 2 hours or in 2 days. And so just given the scope of work, so that was the layers of complexity for us that were pushing against our ability to have real information that was tangible for you all as customers. My suggestion would be, because we put a lot of work into after actions from the storm on, you know, information like what you're asking for and what you didn't quite experience during the storm. And so a lot of that effort's being gone to in our phone systems and then on our website. So, you know, we've got now at the tail end of the storm, we are putting together website display that would show a map of your area. You could zoom in, and it was kind of an active map, and it would show the number of outages as were defined in your area that we knew of and had on our system. And then it would also show the number of crews out in your area. And so it would have like a little, I think it's like a blinking dot. So you could have a sense of, oh, in my area, there's 1,200 customers out and there's 3 crews responding. I know that's a visual aid that we're working to make standard as we came out of the storm that was being used. So I know that's not necessarily satisfying and like, oh, we have a specific answer on how to get that information to you, but it's a tricky one.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
And the last question we have is from John McCabe. John, it looks like your question in chat to me got cut off. Would you like to ask it?
Okay, what's concerned is we had a PG sub out on our street, and they eventually got the power back on. Then I said, well, aren't you going to go someplace else, or could you hook up our cable and stuff like that? They go, we can't do anything unless we're told. And they stayed there for over 2 hours. And I'm like, it didn't seem that there was a centralized management to move these people around.
I didn't quite catch, John, what the experience you had was. You said there was recovery of your energy, but then I didn't quite catch what you meant by cable and whatnot.
Okay, well, in other words, these guys have the skills to hook up cable, but they were going,
you mean like
internet that's cable? Not who we're contracted with, so we won't do it.
Do you mean like internet cable and that type of
Yep.
thing? Yeah. So it sounds like you might have run into one of our contractors. That
it was.
Contractors. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. They were contracted to work for us on energy, and so, I don't know what to tell you there.
I mean, if somebody, like if they reported in when they were done, which we know they did because we got a text message immediately, but nobody assigned them to go someplace else, and they just sat there on our very small road for over 2 hours. because nobody would dispatch them to someplace else. And it's something, I guess, to look forward in the future.
Yeah, no, it's helpful feedback. I think, you know, the layers of complexity are there is that it was a contract crew. They have their own dispatch, right, as their own company, that the contracting company, they're working with our dispatch. And so you've got an extra layer of dispatching going on. And we were under, you know, high volume and hard to connect. So yeah, without knowing the exact situation and what crew that was, it's hard to tell, but helpful feedback.
We don't have any more hands raised or any other questions in chat.
Great.
Sure.
Well, Andrew, thanks for sharing your knowledge and your communication skills with us tonight. And hopefully you'll think of the Stafford Hamlet, you know, if you get to be the decision maker and as to who gets their power back on first, just remember us and what a warm and friendly group we are. And I'm sure all that requires is you pressing a button and things happen. So anyway, bud, thanks for your time. And this was exactly what we needed to hear is how the system works and what's possible and what isn't. So
No, thank you for having me. And if there's anything I can help with, you know, before we get on our full-time Clackamas County person, please reach out. Rick knows how to get in touch with me. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the, Sally Vischer is now, the parties at Sally Vischer's after Rick and Mark's efforts at getting our heritage straightened away. We're going to move on to the CPO portion of the meeting, which I'm going to turn over to Randy. And at this point, if Katie Wilson, if you want to throw up the agenda, there's, I think there's some pieces on there that folks can kind of read through so that the background on some of these applications are going to be but maybe easier for folks to understand and let Randy move through things. Randy, you there, bud?
Yeah.
All right, take it.
Okay. Well, it looks like first on the agenda here is the Rasique Park project. And things have been kind of quiet on it, although the Palisades neighborhood has formally adopted the Stafford area HACHT plan, and they did a resident survey that shows a strong preference for a park oriented toward family in a neighborhood setting with covered areas like they have in the in some of the other parks, with a fireplace and for picnics and cookouts. And in addition to the HACHT plan, they are requesting a park-like field with no light pollution, freedom from or reduction of attendance for tournament events, and natural turf, which is quite a departure.
Low battery.
Sorry about that. Which is quite a departure from the stadium lights, the building it for tournament events, and the artificial sports surface that they initially were insisting that they needed. And that is the Parks Department needed. And they sent letters in the survey to the mayor, the city council, and the Parks Department, and they can be viewed at the Stafford Hamlet Gmail if you can get to that. So Rick might have some more information on continuing communications with the Palisades Neighborhood Association. So Rick, if you could.
Yeah, just a couple things. I'm glad you touched on the Palisades Neighborhood Association is really pushing hard. Their number one thing is not to have entrance off of Atherton Drive. At one point in time, they had a temporary park there, and it was just a disaster. Plus, if you have the entrance and exit there, it's just going to draw people through the neighborhood to get there. So that's one of their biggest things. Supposedly, there's supposed to be a traffic report summary coming out just about the Rasique property. When they did the traffic study, they did the golf course and Rasique. I'm not sure how you take a traffic study and look at all the things when you don't know what's going in yet. So that's a question I had. And sometime in August, supposedly there's going to be a neighborhood meeting, which Stafford Hamlet would be a part of. They haven't set the date yet. I think they're really working hard behind the scenes after the last PAC meeting. So I think that's about it for me.
Okay. And we had some new applications and some old applications for zoning applications. And there's a project going in at Hilltop Road. And that is, Hilltop Road is way over to the, I guess it'd be the north side of the hamlet, the north end of the hamlet. And it's close to Childs Road, between Childs Road and the Westridge development in Lake Oswego. And it's not either in the hamlet or the city. It's in kind of a county area that's not included in those boundaries, but it is in the CPO. And I talked to the planner. The lot appears to be legal, but earlier they were trying to make it legal, which doesn't really make sense to me. But they've determined that they have created a legal lot, 1.2 acres, and they're going through a steep slope review, habitat conservation review, and construction management plan for the steep slope and habitat, and right now. And so when those reviews are complete, the site's going to be ready for permits. I haven't seen anything come through on a special septic system, which they would need for that kind of a site, I would think. But apparently that's in the works. And so it looks like they're going to go ahead and build something on those sites. And then there's a Rosemont Road, which is 1010 South Rosemont Road. And it's a historic property, apparently. And I kind of remember they're doing something with that a few years ago. And the objective at that point was to get all of the historic structures on the site on one lot so that they retain the integrity of the historic nature of the site. And then other partitions were to be developed separately from that. And so right now they're doing the historic review, and it looks okay. They've accomplished the maintaining the historic character. And another one is on Wisteria and Woodbine, and that is also a similar habitat conservation review. And it's a partition into 2 5-acre parcels. It looks like it's going to be feasible to build. And so because most of the buildable area is outside the habitat conservation area, they have sizable, the 5-acre lots. So they have room room for the residences and additional driveways and structures to produce housing. And then the other one is on Captain's. We talked about it last time. Essentially, everything's fine there, except they need a connection to the road, to the cul-de-sac, which looks like they're going to have to be, and it doesn't look like they have it right now, but they're going to need a easement through one of the lots that is on that faces onto the cul-de-sac, that's between their property and the cul-de-sac, in order to have driveway just to be able to get onto their site. So if they can get that, they'll need approval from the owners of that property and the homeowners association to get access to the driveway and the energy needed for the development. So I have no idea how that's going to go. And I think there was the WUFC project, but Mitch said that there wasn't nothing had actually happened on that. If Mitch would like to speak about that or not, he can. So, Mitch?
Just 2 comments. I mean, basically, we're still waiting for the LUBA to schedule the CUP appeal, and I won't belabor that any further, really. But so we actually expect them to schedule pretty soon, which probably puts out a couple of months from now for the actual our actual appeal.
Yeah, it takes forever. So I think that's, I can't scroll the thing on the screen there, but I think those are the only things we have going right now. Land sent in a couple of projects that are in the city of Lake Oswego that the city has to inform the Hamlet, the neighborhood associations, that there are land use actions taking place. But they are embedded in the city. They're quite a ways from the edge of the city property and would not have significant impact on the Hamlet. So unless something is extremely unusual for those properties, I don't think it's necessary to mention their locations or what they are. So I think,
Great.
is that about it?
I mean, it looks like what you've got on the agenda. So thank
Yeah.
you. Good job. I mean, you covered a lot of turf, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, when you brought up both the issue behind your place up off of Childs and how that relates, and Captain's, how they're having to deal with the city, but the property is actually in the hamlet or in the county outside of the city, you know, all this stuff can get pretty convoluted. But yeah, you definitely synthesized it well. Thanks, Randy.
Okay.
John McCabe has his hand raised.
Well, take it away, John.
Yeah, I'm just bringing this up now because it'll slightly affect the CPO. But the LPGA is going to be at the Oregon Golf Club in September. They don't have permits to be there if they're going to have more than 3,000 people. Take as an example, in 2009 out of Pumpkin Ridge, they had 130,000 people. And I'm like, and they just announced that, you know, last month that they were going to go to the Oregon Golf Club. I got hold of the planning department and they go, nobody's contacted us. And I go, do you not think you should contact them? And of course, when they used to have the Fred Meyer Challenge up there, there was no houses up there. So they parked people everywhere. Now they have houses. And so I don't understand how this is going to work. And we might have to be involved quickly if they are going to go after permits, because it will affect our CPO.
Well, John, there is a permit. It's called it's a land use permit. It's called agritourism or other commercial event or activity.
Right. And it has to be under 3,000 people. And that's the whole thing, is if they have more than 3,000, they have to get new permits.
Are they going to have, well, definitely they're going to have more than 3,000 people if it's like a PGA event.
LPGA.
Either way.
Yeah, and if that's what they told me, is if it was under 3,000, they're fine. But if they're
Unless
over
they're going to
3,000,
limit it to 3,000.
right? And nobody knows yet.
Oh, okay.
Well, John, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, you know, maybe what we need to do is just, you know, shoot them a letter, shoot the county a letter and see if we can get some kind of response. I mean, as active as that's going to be for those, I don't know, whatever it is, 4 days or 5 days, it's going to be pretty intense down in the city of West Linn and Willamette too. I mean, I would imagine the only way they're going to make this thing work is with some kind of a shuttle.
Yeah.
And even, you know, even parking in that context is going to be, it's going to be very, very challenging.
But,
so,
it seems like if we could contact the event organizer and ask them straight up how many people they're going to have.
Yeah, that would be a good start.
And
yeah,
then,
I already did ask them.
Oh, how many?
And the response was a lot.
Well, yeah.
That's all they said to me, is they go, we're expecting a lot because it's a bigger course. And I'm like, and how many? Because my question to them was, well, you're going to sell over more than 3,000 tickets? And they go, don't worry, it'll be more than that.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so it was a setup question.
Well,
yeah. Okay. Well, however you guys want to approach it, that's fine. We can talk offline and come up with an approach. But thanks. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this up, John.
Hey, Bill?
Yeah.
Just real quick, Katie, who would our contact be with transportation and development that would okay that? Is there somebody we could work through to find some answers out?
I mean,
Her last name is Hughes.
Yeah, Jennifer Hughes.
Jennifer Hughes is the director. I don't know who is which planner is assigned to that project, but Jennifer could absolutely tell you that.
yeah. We'll run that down.
Okay. That's probably a whole meeting right there. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. we're going to move on to the Hamlet board meeting. And again, thanks CPO folks for all your efforts out there. So I don't know, we're actually pretty close to being on time here. I'll see what I can do to get everybody out of here promptly. So call to order. You guys have all seen the agenda, and if you haven't, it's nobody's fault but your own. Is there any changes that need to be made to the agenda, or can we get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thanks so much, Andy. Anybody want to second that? Come on now.
Second.
Whoever that might have been, thank you very much. Okay, so all those in favor of going through the agenda as written, I don't know, do we raise our hands at this point? Is that the easiest way as opposed to physically doing it on the screen? Because I can only see a few people on the screen, so I'm just gonna, there. Everybody raise your hand if you're good with that. How many, we get 6 folks raising their hands there, Katie Wilson?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Okay. Moving on. Approve the minutes. So Kate sent these out a little earlier this time due to some financial requests we made of her. Is there anybody that wants to insert or take out something that were in the minutes that they didn't think belonged or something that was lacking? That being said, do we have a motion to approve the minutes as written?
Motion to approve.
Oh, Andy, you're the best. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks. Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes, get your little hand things going here. Raise your hand. How do we look, Katie Wilson?
Your vote is unanimous.
Oh, look at us. Okay, treasurer's report, Bill Long. You sent that out.
Yeah. Not much to say.
Well, let me interject something. So we, I think, ended up with about $434 in our checking account. And that being the case, we should get $2,000 minus the 434 for our next year's budget. So essentially, we're going to start with $2,000. Whatever we've got left gets taken off of that, and so it ends up it's $2,000. And we did also we ran into a little bit of a back and forth on the vote that we took last month to give the Lake Grove Garden Club through Carol Yamada some money so I think it was $400 to help with the signage on the pollinators, and that has been approved. There was some concern that it was a nonprofit and that was going to be a deal breaker, but after some negotiations, we're good. And I had told Carol to tell Patty, who is the Lake Grove person, to hold on to the check. She did, and so they're able now to go cash that, and we'll get some recognition for that, and they'll get a good document or a good piece of information to share with the kids that come through the pollinator garden. So thank you, guys. So we have some committee reports. I'm not sure how active they are. Communications, Patty, anything you want to throw in there? Patty, Manuel.
Yeah, sorry, it just took me a while to find my unmute. There isn't really too much that's new. We're continuing to work on soliciting neighborhood captains. You were good enough to round up a couple. And so I just would like to remind all of you on the board, if you know anybody in your neighborhood that you think might be interested in getting involved, this is an easy first step, to get people connected. And then we had a really good amount of sunflowers that we've passed out. In fact, all of them. Are all of them gone from your box, Rich?
There are still a few there. Bill actually came by to fill it up, and we had actually taken the ones that were out front and put them up there. I didn't, my sister did. So it keeps going down. People are still stopping and taking them. So
yeah, and
hope for the bloom.
I took 2 different basketfuls to the Westland Farmers Market, and 2 different ones to the Lake Oswego Farmers Market, and then Cordell's. They said they just went like hotcakes there, so I took several there. So hopefully we'll have some in the hamlet. It seems all the ones that I planted withered because they didn't get a lot of good water, so I had to start over again. But I think the good thing about it is that even if the people who took them plant them, it's just creating some awareness of the hamlet. So I think all in all, it was a great idea, Rich. Great idea.
You get lucky once in a while, Patty. Thanks.
Yep. So that's about it. There's some other issues, but I think we're gonna talk about those at the retreat. So I probably will just save those with the volunteers and things like that.
Well, one of the things I wanted to bring up, and it was kind of made apparent with Andrew in his presentation tonight, is this is exactly when we're going through a crisis. I mean, we had the ice storm, then we had the overwhelming heat, which I don't think too many of our folks lost power, but a number of folks in Westland proper did. So, I mean, there's always an opportunity to be in touch with your neighbors and make sure everybody's doing okay. And yeah, this is a great idea, Patty, that the neighborhood captains. And I think the more we do it, the more we keep engaged, the more sophisticated and thorough that it will become. So thanks. Well, so we talked sunflower seeds. We're up to Rich Fiala and the Ag Committee. You got anything you want to share about the Ag Committee?
Well, I think it's general. I think all of us realize now how difficult it was to keep our plants alive, not just the sunflowers, but everything when it's 117 degrees. And, Andy and Tate and many of us are about planting trees and green spaces and keeping the environment clean. And the more trees we can put in the ground, somehow, maybe my grandchildren or great grandchildren will reap the benefits of that because we're obviously a bit in the wrong direction right now. Farming wise has been a big challenge though with the heat. I've been looking at my crops out there, and as many of you know, dahlias don't like that kind of heat. I couldn't keep them wet enough. We probably lost 30% of them, as it turns out. And so welcome to farming. But I also heard a long range forecast that says August is actually going to be cooler than normal. So we'll see. And welcome to the world of farming. Thanks, guys.
And to that end, the Fialas were open last weekend. I think you're going to be open next weekend. And depending on how things come on, you may even be open during the week after that. So just stay tuned. But Fiala's is up and running. So
yep.
Good job.
Lucky us, huh?
Yeah, you don't put in all that work and not be able to sell stuff. So yeah.
That's right. Thank you. Now.
You bet. Andy, did you talk to anybody from the sheriff's department besides the the person-to-person sheriff that comes by periodically to make sure you're doing the right stuff?
I did. And they got me a pretty thorough report today. It's a good looking report. So if I can try to share the screen here. We can see how that goes. Is that working yet?
You're in.
All right, cool. So they put this together, a nice PowerPoint. And so you can see the calls for service, dispatch versus self-initiated. I talked to someone about this 37 in April, and they indicated that there was an event over at the Buddhist temple that I think it involved like a car break-in, but the media was involved. And so it sounded like they got a lot of presence there. And so that might have been deputies coming from other areas. I just didn't want the data to look skewed. And that's just from one person. I don't officially know if that number 37 is really high because of that. They put this together, calls by type. Again, that extra patrol, I haven't spoke with anybody at the sheriff's office about whether that specifically means that event or whether this is more routine patrol. But you can get an idea looking at that list. That's March, April, May, June, July, and kind of a spread of what we're seeing out here. Cases created, so obviously traffic crashes are at the top of that list, which is, I think, pretty common out here. And then I think, one of the most interesting data sets was this map. And so in the past, they've been giving me the actual case numbers and the data, but not putting it in a model like this. And so I think we're going to be able to trend and get to compare whether we're heading in the right direction. To me, the most important thing I'm seeing here is this orange dot that says self-initiated. And that to me would mean that there was a deputy out here doing a patrol and coming across something versus all these black dots that are, somebody called and they showed up. Ideally, we would see maybe more yellow dots because it would indicate that they're out here more. But they just shot this report over today, so I haven't gone through it with Officer McClure or a deputy to really break it down. And then I think from here, the next important thing would be finding out what our response times are in general. Maybe I could throw out a couple addresses and they could give me a rough idea so that we know, all right, if your car is getting stolen, it'll take 3 minutes or 35 minutes to get them out here.
Great. No, that's good. That's
You got a question?
Hey, just real quick, is this going to be posted on the Hamlet website when you're done talking about it with?
Yeah, I could forward it to Tate to get it up there. I should talk to the officer over there that gave it to me to just make sure that we can clarify precisely like why that 1 month was a lot higher for self-initiated.
Yeah, and this might be some good information that we can use with the developments going in through Lake Oswego and the parks and that stuff.
Sure.
And then my second question is, when you're talking to one of those guys, can you talk about or ask him if there is a noise level that automobiles can go through? I mean, I think we have all heard the cars from, I'm at the very north end of Stafford, Hamlet, and I can hear them down at the freeway.
Yeah, and I've heard, like, I don't know if it's biker gangs on 205, but you'll hear a rumble that'll last quite a while. Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't know if that's 150 motorcycles riding down 205, and whether they, in today's climate, whether they have time or resources to come out and patrol that.
It's the speed which what they come through the roundabout is amazing. Because
Right.
Of course you have to slow down to go into it, and then of course you have to floor it coming out, and that makes the noise. And
right.
I thought that maybe the young men that were stuck in their houses got new mufflers for Christmas, or college students that were moving back home with mom and dad.
You get a program
Anyway,
for young men going.
They're a little loud, and I know there's lots of us that have complained, but just if they can get kind of a heads up, like, yeah, maybe that's something that we could do something about. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you. Thank the sheriff's office for the report.
Yeah, and thanks for keeping them on our side, Andy. Okay, so the next thing up is kind of a duplication of what we already did with Lake Oswego Palisades Neighborhood Association and Rasique. And I would try not to duplicate that next time. But thanks for doing all you did with that, Randy, through the CPO. So outside our borders, C4. So we are going to need to be looking for somebody to replace John. I mean, John has gone to some of these Zoom meetings, even though he's up in Washington now. But we need to get somebody that'll sit in on that. And one of the things that we're going to talk about at the retreat is engaging more volunteers. So anybody that's listening tonight that has an interest, certainly get in touch with us. But we're going to have to find somebody. It doesn't have to be a board member, but certainly it could, that can take that on. And I'm not sure. Did you listen in? I think did John listen into the last one, Rick? You're muted, bud. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you read my sign language?
All right.
I just sat in early because I wasn't sure if John was going to get connected from Washington. But I think the other piece that they were talking about was the polling on 205, which is going to, will always be talked about. We had a post-fire update, and I think Katie's going to touch on that maybe a little bit with the leaders meeting under the CCI piece. And also, I just saw Chris Lyons is in the house, I see, who is the legislative. I don't know if he had any C4 thing, a 30-second shot, Chris, if you want to say something about C4 maybe, because I didn't sit in through the whole meeting. If you're there.
Hey, Rick, Chris here. Is there something specific you're looking for on this one?
Just, I didn't, like I said, I sat into just the very first, and I don't know if there was something that, if there was one or two things at C4 you think the CP or the Hamlet and CPO would, just kind of keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain. That was 2 weeks ago.
Well, it was a typical polling thing in I-205. Maybe that's it. What's the Curtis status? Are they going to fund the bridge now?
Yeah, the update there is the legislature passed HB 3055 this session. And what that enables ODOT to do is start construction on phase 1A of the 205 project, which is between Oregon 43 and Oregon 213, so including the Abernathy Bridge. So they will start that in the spring or summer. And there were a couple things the bill did. It lets them tap into that, what we're calling the flexible penny, the previously dedicated penny to the Rose Quarter that's now made a bit more regional. And it also lets ODOT bond quite a bit more money than they've been able to do in the past. And so what they're essentially doing is being able to move ahead with this project with a plan to eventually toll 205 at the Abernathy Bridge so that those tolling revenues can then pay back the bonds at a later date.
Great.
So all in all, good news that they can move ahead with the project. We at the county are still concerned with ODOT's plans to toll I-205 earlier than the rest of the region by 2 or 3 years. And so we're talking with our federal delegation now to see if there's a possibility of getting additional federal dollars to potentially preclude the need to toll 205. what the states provided this session was great, and it's letting them move ahead with the project, but it still isn't what, it still isn't anywhere close to full funding for the project. So there is still a gap. And at this point, the only source for that is tolling.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. And then my only other thing with that, instead of tolling I-205, they should toll Stafford, Rosemont, and the neighborhood areas that all the cut through people else, other than the local residents. So get that done, you'll be our hero.
Yeah, well, on that note, I will say one other thing the bill did is it allows ODOT to use revenues from tolling or from future congestion management on what they termed adjacent, parallel, and connected routes to the interstates. And so, I think they are anticipating changes in traffic patterns as a result of tolling onto local facilities. And so now some of those monies will be able to be used to improve those local facilities to address the changing traffic patterns.
It'll be interesting to see what they consider adjacent is.
Yes, that is to be determined at a later date by the Oregon Transportation Commission.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your input there.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Katie, I'll let you talk about CCI.
Sure. So we had a CCI meeting last month, and it looks like we're going to have one this month too, Rick, by the vote that I saw from the rest of the members. And primarily what CCI has been working on lately is supporting the community wildfire debrief. So we had a community leaders meeting to kind of kick off the effort to gather feedback from the community regarding the 2020 wildfire season. And so a lot of really helpful feedback was collected there from CPO and Hamlet leaders. That was followed up by a policy session with disaster and fire partners, including Brent Perry's as a community liaison. He's the chair of the Eagle Creek Barton CPO, and also has some personal history with wildfire mitigation, given that his career in logging. And so he had some specific personal experience from the fire that he experienced out in the Estacada Eagle Creek area, and was able to provide the community perspective of what happened, like boots on the ground, what happened during that time out in his area. So that was really helpful. And some next steps for continuing the dialogue around the wildfire will be an upcoming policy session to talk about a community advisory group to help guide disaster preparedness, and then a broader listening session with the community, and then hopefully and then also a follow-up community leaders meeting to talk more specifically about what CPOs and Hamlets can do. We've had a lot of interest from CPO and Hamlet leaders around what can we do, what can you do to help your communities with preparedness and response when disaster does strike. And so we'd love to take a deeper dive into that with CPO and Hamlet leaders to talk about that and what areas CPOs and Hamlets might be most helpful to help us with communication in communities and different needs that come up during disaster and to prepare for disaster. So that has really been CCI's focus right now. They've been super helpful in providing feedback and guidance on how we can do this. They provided a lot of input on the timeline, wanting us to get this done as soon as possible, because we know there's a lot of concern out in the community that we are now entering wildfire season and 2021, and wanting to get more communication out about how we can be prepared for this coming hot season, having had that first heat wave and knowing that the fire season will continue, wanting to be as prepared as possible and wanting to help get the word out and communicate with all of our constituents out in the county and different needs. So thank you so much to CCI. Thank you, Rick. Did I miss anything?
No, you're right on.
Thanks.
Good job. So I had this, I think from our last meeting under upcoming activities, but now it's past activity, and that was on the 16th. I gave our Hamlet update to the county commissioners. It was a 5-minute little blurb, and it was well received. And basically, you guys sit through all these meetings, so you know essentially what I said. Yeah, nothing profound, just keeping them apprised. And we were supposed to have Mark Scholl tonight, but he evidently couldn't access getting on our Zoom meeting. So we'll probably make a try at that. I'll talk to him tomorrow, but we'll make a try for that next month. And we always welcome, whether it's past locals like Jeff or certainly the county commissioners. We're available. That being said, we got a retreat coming up on Thursday from 5 to 6:30. And we'll try to keep it down to that hour and a half and be efficient. Appreciate everybody's willingness to come and do this. And is there anything else on anybody's plate that they want to share at this time? That is enough time for somebody to think up something. So our next meeting is next month on the second Tuesday, which will be the 10th. And we'll look forward to it, and we'll have something new to report. And thank you, attendees, and thank you, board and participants. Have a good evening, and don't let it get to you.
Quick item.
Oh. John McCabe?
Yeah, since the county's been open, can't we meet someplace in the open now? Rather than on Zoom?
Well, we can. The only thing is that we typically, and the only reason that we haven't been taking off the 2 months, or anyway, my only reason, there may be other reasons, was because there's been so much activity with the CPO. Typically, we don't meet in July and August because the school isn't open. And typically, we're meeting at Stafford School. So, to your point, yeah, we probably can start meeting, but next month's not going to, it's not going to be any different because the school is going to be closed. But come September, we definitely could have an in-person meeting, and maybe that's something I need to add to the agenda for the retreat, is a little back and forth on how people see this. It feels like we get good attendance by doing this, but I personally miss seeing people face to face. So yeah, that's
Bill,
yeah.
you just might want to be aware that there have been quite a few of our community groups who have expressed interest in trying to start meeting in person again, have come up against challenges that a lot of community spaces are not opening up to public meetings yet. I can't speak for the school district or, the other facilities in your community, but I know that has been an issue. A lot of the fire stations are not planning to reopen for community meetings until after the first of the year.
I ran into that with the retreat. I tried the fire station, and in fact, I tried West Lynn Library initially, Lake Oswego, which wasn't open. That room wasn't open yet, but they had slated it to be by the time we needed it. So yeah,
okay,
well taken. But we can certainly do some checking. I mean, Len has the inside track to the school district, so I don't know where he is tonight, but we'll get him hooked up, see what's possible.
Katie,
sounds good.
is there I know at one point in time we were talking about doing a hybrid where it was both in person and online. What's the status of that?
Currently, we don't have a feasible option to do that. The technology needed to have a Zoom meeting, a hybrid Zoom meeting, is complicated and difficult to execute out in community. And so we have the ability to do that in our boardroom. It's an expensive setup and not particularly mobile. And so we are exploring options to find ways that we might be able to support that in the future, likely by outfitting community spaces, county community spaces that we might be able to offer up for meetings. But currently there's not really a feasible, unfortunately, there's not really a mobile way to do that provides the sound and video quality that we need to be able to execute a hybrid meeting. We will continue to look into it, Rick, but right now it's not financially feasible and there really isn't a great tool that is mobile. So, but we will continue to look into that. And if community meeting spaces are set up for that in the future, I'll be sure to let you know.
Thanks, Katie.
Sure.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else? Going once, twice. Good night. Thanks for coming.